Hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's contract administration practice session. But with that, then, I do want to hand it off to Jim and Doug to get going with today's session. So, Jim and Doug, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Matthew. And I'll just ask for Doug and I, it'd be really cool if you'd include us on that email for the whole package zip drive. That sounds great. Thank you for doing that. And welcome, everybody. Doug?
Welcome, everybody. Let's, Jim, go ahead and jump in.
Jump right in. Let's do it. So, Matthew, first slide, please, sir. And it's just an image to give us a cover. We're crossing the finish line, so we're almost done. Shout back to you Richard Petty fans out there. So what is project closeout? What is the completion? Well, Doug and I talk about this all the time, but this is the beginning of the use of the project for the purpose it was intended. So we're closing out, we culminate in that closeout phase, and that is giving the project over to the client, to the owner, in some orderly fashion. So let's take a look at the next slide, and we'll start to talk about who does that. Well, there are many players. So the manufacturer at this point is inspecting installed work for any kind of specific warranties. Suppliers are turning over documents for owners and to operate with, to maintain the facility. Subcontractors are getting things started, systems started up, preparing record documents, going through their punch list activities to complete the work within their contracts and to get the owners ready to use systems. Contractors are managing all of this process as well as making their own inspections, getting all of this data accumulated in the proper format and turned over to the owner through the architects and engineers, and getting things cleaned up and ready to use. Let's look at the next slide, Matthew. The architects and engineers, the designers, are doing their inspections, pulling records together in a fashion after the contractor submission of that information, doing some final change orders, pay applications, signed certifications for the project being substantially and finally ready. There may be commissioning agents who perhaps have been involved in the whole project or maybe just at the end, and we'll talk a little about that, who are completing their work to commission the facility and bring it up to speed, up to operation. And in cases where there is some sustainability designation, perhaps those outside consultants or within firms, design firms, you're going through documents of pulling together paperwork and submittals, doing evidentiary kind of certification for what has gone on during the project. Let's go to the next slide. And the best out of all, the owner is accepting the project and making those final payments to everyone, including us on the design side, releasing retainages and having their personnel go through appropriate training sessions, and perhaps if they have facility management or on-site teams, those folks are have maybe been involved from the very beginning, or if not, are now being introduced to the facility through training and other exercises to get them ready to take over the operation. So those are the participants. I blew through that pretty quickly there. So first let me ask Doug if there's anything to add, and then Matthew, are there any questions at that point? Doug?
Only thing to add is, and I didn't think about it until just going through right now, Jim, is we didn't mention the authority having jurisdiction, making sure that all of the required inspections and certificates that they issue have been taken care of.
There you go. That one's a really important one. That's right, Doug. Thank you, man. Authority having jurisdiction. got to get the inspections done. Matthew, any hands raised?
At the moment, everybody seems to be quiet. That's usually how it starts, and then they pick up some speed towards the end. So,
cool. Well, let's go to the next slide then, and start to just to touch on where all of this in our documents is spelled out. Within AIA documents, it's in the 201, A201 general conditions, and sort of list there what we've just spoken through. Inspections happen, and one of the things that we seem to have happen pretty frequently is the project first and the punch list first is to be done by the general contractor, and then it's something that we use as an architect or engineer, as a designer, as a go-by, to go back with that punch list generated by the contractor in hand to supplement it and add items that we see that they did not. And that's an opportunity to cross off things that they have already done. So in the 201, we then see those items be corrected. We do, as architects and engineers, an inspection to verify all of that, process the final payment application, and send it on to the owner. And in the next slide, the EJCDC document C700 spells out very similar information. The contractor inspects the project and does a tentative punch list, submits a notice of substantial completion, you see is a little different there. And then the engineer, the contractor, and the owner inspect the project to verify that and assure that those items are complete or that supplemental punch list items are added to it. And the engineer then creates a tentative certificate of substantial completion. Contractor corrects the items. There's another inspection by the engineer to verify that. And then that processing of final payment is made to the owner. So within the AIA and EJCDC documents, they're very similar steps and stages to the closeout process. So if there aren't any questions, we can go on to the next slide and talk about some of the basic components of this whole process of closing out.
No questions at this point yet.
Okay.
Jim, I'd like to ask a question as we are continuing through. I would like for the participants, if they wouldn't mind, to send in what they have found to be the most difficult part in getting a project closed out, and maybe we can touch on some of that at the end.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yes. So your stories of what might have been hang-ups to get over that finish line, and send them in, and then we'll dive into those as we get to the end. That's a great idea, Doug. Thank you. So one of the things that always is an important part of the finish is to start the building up. And that begins with testing of systems, adjusting and balancing those systems so that they operate properly. Typically, the subcontractor responsible for that work is the party that's doing that. And often there are manufacturers' representatives there when this process is underway to be sure that their requirements are being followed so that subsequent warranties are not voided and are not in jeopardy when those pieces of equipment are started up. That startup process typically begins and happens before a second piece of startup, but a really important piece, which is the demonstration of those systems to the personnel that are going to maintain them. We see often maybe a startup that's not so quickly followed by the training, but it can happen that those are close together along a timeline. But that startup, that training for the owner, the training for the owner is typically something that goes into much more detail with the personnel that are in attendance. We've seen those be in mechanical rooms like you see here in the image, but we also see those include maybe classroom time, PowerPoints, videos, horror stories, maintenance examples. They vary pretty widely depending on the size and scope of the project, but always are done to follow the manufacturer's requirements and often include their personnel at the project. So curious, does anybody have any questions about the actual startup, demonstration, and training piece of Project Closeout? Matthew, any hands up there? Or Doug, any comments?
I would suggest, depending on the size and complexity of the systems that you're using, you may want to get those training sessions videotaped. I've done that in the past where I've required the contractor to have a professional videotape the training session so that the owner and his people that are using the system have something they can go back and look to if they have questions or if there's personal changes. They've got that training on tape that they can use as a resource.
It's a wonderful practice, and it does a couple of things that, one of which is when personnel change and perhaps new folks come on board, it's a resource for your customer, and they don't forget that. Your customers won't forget things like that, so that they're able to perhaps train new individuals on the system. Matthew, any hands up?
Nope, everybody's so quiet.
Good. Well, let's go to the next slide and look at the record documents for the project. These can include, again, depending on the scope of the job, a wide variety of documents. They can be bid documents that were revised in the field. Same for specifications that have been marked up, construction submittals that have come in, whether that's shop drawings or other additional data information used to construct with. That should include the addenda, any kind of bulletin documents that have been either provided to the construction team or that the contractor has created, along with photos, logs, test reports, any sort of changes and directives that have occurred with the work. And, you know, this at one point in time used to be a large paper rolls of drawing, boxes of files, handoff, typically coming through the architect and or engineer to be used to create a digital document that eventually was turned over to the owner. Now, as you see in the image here, it may come all together as electronic information. I've been in recent conversations about what the job site trailer is going to look like in another 10 years, and whether those rolls of drawings and piles of shop drawings and stacks of samples are going to be spread about the trailer, or it's just going to be a large computer screen under a small shed roof. I don't know, but the record document piece is becoming more and more about something captured in an image like this and the transfer of paper. Let's keep moving through the slides and take a look at another outdated example, which are the O&M manuals. You know, at a time, this was yet again more stacks of binders and all paper, you know, documents that were comprised of data collected when the project was being built for the owner's use to operate with, typically broken down in a master format, kind of organized process. and they were assembled by the contractor, provided by the subs to that contractor. There may have been a commissioning authority involved who started this from the very beginning of the job, or maybe not involved at all, and so they came together at the very end. There's software that is a part of this turnover of manuals to operate the facility that may be unique to the pieces of equipment that are in a building, depending on how complex it is. And maybe, Doug, you could share some information about, for example, a healthcare medical kind of setting and what might be the parts that come over to operate and maintain that kind of facility. But I'll end and say it also includes the extra pieces and parts that we refer to as attic stock that would be part of that final submission. Doug?
Just to jump in about you saying this being the old-fashioned way of doing it with the O&M manuals being bound in binders, just a word of caution. I have found that there are still many folks that are running these facilities that are old school, so to speak, or older in age, and would prefer to have a book to look in rather than a disk or a flash drive to try to research, to try to find what they're looking for. And the other thing on that is it wasn't that long ago, Jim, I'm sure you remember the 5 1/4 inch floppy diskettes that we used to use with computers, and then they went to 3 1/2 inch hard diskettes that were more of a protection for the media that was inside. And now we're with CDs and flash drives. If you had gotten everything back then on one of those 5 1/4 inch floppy disks and you needed to look something up on it today, I think you'd be hard pressed trying to find a machine that you could read it off of. But paper, provided it's not the thermal paper where it fades over time, that's something that you can always go back and look at.
That's right. That's excellent. It's paper stays around, paper works, as long as you don't have a water problem or a fire problem. It's there. It's a great point, Doug. It really is. And how many times would you have had to transfer the information? Now it's in the cloud, wherever that is. And we are not, for those of you that are participating, we're not making fun of technology, but Doug's absolutely right. And so I'm at a university here today telling you that probably 85% of the people that know how to operate the systems here do not use tablets, computers, and many of them don't have smartphones, but they make these buildings operate, and they do that with paper and images and pipe diagrams that they understand with rolls of really dog-eared paper. It's a great point. And knowing your client when you're creating your specifications and what they want to receive as a deliverable is really an important part of deciding how you're going to meet this requirement in your contract. Any hands raised, Matthew?
We have some questions that have come in here, yeah, so we'll try to go through them as we go. So the first couple are from Lauren. In a multifamily, my nightmare projects have been when GCs will not admit to have their own punch list and ask us architects to ferret out the deficiencies in 100 units. And he also adds in here, getting project records on a thumb drive has been a great change. So kind of following up to where you're talking about the binders, it sounds like having everything on the digital file is working out pretty good for Lauren here. I'm not sure if you want to add anything there, else we also have some information came in from Drusilla as well.
Again, as Jim said, we weren't making fun of technology or trashing it. I'm just saying as a word of caution. Like Jim said, know who your client is, know what they're going to want to have in their hands at the end of the job. While getting a flash drive might be convenient and quick and easy, than trying to pick up 2 boxes of 3-ring binders and to transport and ship. It might be better for you, but when it gets to the guy that's actually got to go out and fix the air handler, and he's looking at that flash drive and wondering, well, how do I open this thing up? That's not going to do him much good.
That's right.
Yep, and building off of that, Drusilla added comments here. They always ask the owner what he or she wants as closeout documents and don't just assume. And part of that she asks is stating meaning what format they want them in. So potentially digital versus physical, but also even within digital, what file format might be helpful. They may just want PDFs versus the actual proprietary software version of files as well.
Excellent point. And having now switched over to the owner side, working here at a healthcare facility where space is a premium, I would say it's also a good idea to ask what they want in terms of attic stock. Because I know when I was practicing, it was rare that I ever asked what they wanted. I just went with the standard, give me 5% of this and 3% of that at the end of the job. And then in our case, where we are now, with space being a premium, we don't have room to put that stuff. And typically what happens would be that the contractor keeps it and uses it on the next job, and I paid for it and I've lost that value.
Absolutely, man. That's so. We could spend an incredible amount of time, I think, digging into just these 2 points right here. As Doug said, when you're doing a project, first having an idea in your mind of what is 5% of the ceiling tile look like on a fill in the blank high school project. That's quite a bit of material. What's X square yards of carpet or vinyl floor tile? That's quite a bit of material. And so you can know for sure that the contractors are including that, just as Doug said, in the cost of construction. Does the owner want it, number one, and do they have space to store it if they do want it? Helping them understand what that means, because perhaps they don't know, is a great client building experience. As you said, as you read, Matthew, knowing the way that the owner wants this material turned over. Let's imagine you're working for a chain facility that has multiple projects, and they have a headquarters, they have a regional headquarters, they have a local headquarters. You want a copy, your engineers want a copy, and you're doing the O&M manuals for this project. That's something, again, we talk a lot about how construction administration should be involved early in the project. You ought to know this when the design contract is being signed, because if they say they want paper in certain kind of bindings, that could be a tremendous amount of money just in O&M manuals that you should account for in your fee. And we need to think like that globally for a project all the way back to the design contract being signed, as to close out and CA and be sure we're covering ourselves in fee for those components to happen like the owner wants. Any other questions, Matthew?
Yeah, we have a question here, which I have a feeling I know Doug is going to want to jump in, because I've heard him talk about this a little bit in the past calls. But Sarah asks, we've had issues with public projects where contractors will damage existing conditions on a building or leave marks on brick or trim, and contractors will fight tooth and nail, even if they know they did it, to have us prove that it was not there prior to construction. So we've ended up finding ourselves photographing buildings in detail and including that in the contract documents. How do you deal with this during punch lists? So I'll start with Doug, because I know he has strong opinions on photographing job sites.
When I've done and it's largely been on state projects where there's existing construction and stuff that's going to stay in place and you're building next to it, I've required the contractor to document the existing conditions and put the burden on the contractor to prove that he didn't do the damage. that's not to say that I try to stick it to contractors, because I really don't. I really do my best to try to be as fair as I can. But they're the ones that are in control of the site. They're the ones that are there every day. They're the ones that are going to be responsible for making those repairs. I put the burden on them to show whether or not it was something, whether it was something that they damaged, or whether it was an existing damage that was there when they got there. So I typically will put that burden on the contractor and put in my front end specs that the contractor needs to document, whether it's video or still photos, the existing conditions as they existed before they started the work. And Jim, before you jump in, I just wanted to touch back. There was a first part of that question when we paused for questions here. There was a comment about getting the contractors to do their punch list. If you're using standard AIA or EJCDC documents, it's in the documents they were required to do it, and it's just a matter of enforcing what's in their contract.
You see how easy that was for Doug to say that, right? we're going to go. Yeah, it's true.
So you don't go out and do your punch list till you receive the punch list from the contractor.
There you go. That's exactly right. Matthew, even if there are more questions, let's go to the next slide, and then the one after that, I want to come back to the punch list conversation we're having right now, because it's a slide set up specifically for us to talk about this topic. And so we've talked about this a little bit, the commissioning part. Basically, two types that Doug and I see: either a total project, where perhaps the commissioning agent is involved in the design phase. That can be at the project conception and continues all the way through to the conclusion. And a lot of this is spelled out in the project delivery practice guide, which is not the basis that we talk about, but it goes into detail in the project delivery practice guide that CSI offers. Typically, though, we see more often just a systems or equipment commissioning where there's some been operational testing and some visits during installation, but typically is less upfront and design involvement and more just checking out of the equipment in the end. But so let's flip to that next slide, and then we'll talk about any questions about commissioning as well as punch lists. But so these are two images of projects that I was called to say we're ready for the punch list. And I'm not making this up. It's too good. You just couldn't make up stories like this. Which is ready, you know? And so as I was laughing at what Doug said, we almost every project have this debate about what does the word finish mean. And I've decided to call it owner finished, architect finished, and contractor finished. And they're all three different. They shouldn't be, but they seem to have developed their own definition. So you walk into the building, and I've done it with Doug, and you look at the image to your right, and you just shake your head and walk out. You don't do anything. When you have to start a punch list that says install or complete, that's not a punch list. The image on the left is, okay, get this dust off and take your ladder back home. That's a punch list. So Doug is right. It is as simple as saying, if you don't have a punch list you can send me, then I don't have a way to schedule a trip, because our contract is based on me receiving your punch list before I come to do the visit. And, you know, we talked about in several series about establishing a project team and communication and collaboration effort. This is not the time to do that. Months and months ago is when you started that process. And hopefully, if that's gone well, you won't end up faced with this choice as to whether you do the punch list or not. But Doug and I have also had instances where this owner on the right needed to be in this facility desperately, and we start making a list so they can start moving in. Now, maybe not quite this bad, but often we're pushed into starting that punch list ahead of when we want to. I don't know, Doug, do you think there's a way to, is there something you should do to document that you're sort of at a contract sequence when you're forced to, say, by your client to begin a process like that? Or should we just go ahead and do it?
No, I think you should document it, be it a memo or email or even if it's a note at the beginning of the punch list. I've done that before, putting a note on the punch list. We're going ahead and started the punch list at the owner's request. The building's not complete and ready, and it's going to, kind of describe, there's going to be a lot of general terms in this because it's not ready. It's going to be like complete the flooring installation, and whereas on a punch list, I would expect to see replace the third tile from the corner that's broke and not complete the flooring installation. So
yeah,
kind of.
But let me interrupt you. Matthew, put up the next slide because Doug's going through some of these things as we talk about it. Go ahead, Doug. I'm sorry.
Oh, that was it.
And so you see here on the slide some of those things Doug's talking about. Is it? Are you just listing an item that needs something, or is it really a punch list? Is it ready for this? Is it really ready? Do your consultants believe it's ready? One of the things in going to still talking in answer to the question about getting the contractor to do their list, I've gone to the authority having jurisdiction and saying, do you think this is ready to do a punch list? Does the owner, does your client feel like it's ready? Talking to the subcontractors, which is probably a little edgy because that we should be doing through the general contractor, but do they think they're, often I have them tell me, I'm not ready for you to be here yet. This is not, you're too early. I think you'll find consensus among other people out there on the project if you ask enough questions that could also support your answer to the contractor being, it's not ready yet. Send me your list. And I think probably what's happening is they're not sending you that list because they know they're not ready, and they'd prove it themselves if they did actually send you a list. Matthew, you have any other questions, or Doug, any other things to add about that?
We have
nothing to add, right?
Oh, I was going to say we have a couple of comments that came in here. First one came in from Kenneth saying, personally, I will not review any project that is in the condition of the one that was on the right. I will do the same as you, turn and walk out the door. So thank you, Ken, for that. Lauren puts in, yes, the projects with punch list problems were all problems of some sort well before we got to that stage. Indeed, owner time pressure is a huge factor. And lastly, coming in from Steve, saying, in reference O&M manuals, electric files, or paper files, should this information be documented in Division 01, Section 017823, specifically on operation and maintenance data of the contract documents?
Go ahead, Jeff. No, you go ahead.
I don't have the CSI format in front of me. I know it should be in Division 1. I couldn't give you the specific section number that it goes in. But typically there is, I've seen it done two ways. I've seen one where there's a Division 1 section that covers O&M manuals, and it covers them from A to Z. So if you've got a question about O&M manuals and what goes in them and what format, how many copies or whatever, it's in that one section. I've also seen that section combined in with, on smaller projects, in with a section that might be called execution or project closeout, so that it's not its own standalone section, but still there's all that information. It might be scaled down because of the size of the project. but all that information in terms of how many copies, what format, what all is required is included in that.
And we both know practitioners that create just entire specification sections and add in supplementary general conditions an entire section on project closeout or perhaps even O&M manual sections, depending again on the scope and size of the projects. Any others, Matthew?
That's it at the moment.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide, and we'll go pretty quickly past that one. So we're down to. Go ahead, Doug.
I was going to just jump in real quick because that last slide, the last bullet on there had a comment on there. Are there items that are warranty or could be viewed as such? My position on Punchlist is I issue one punch list. I will gather all the information from my consultants, and there is one punch list, and once it's issued, that's it. You don't go back out the next day or get a call from the owner 2 days later saying, well, you didn't add this, we need to add this to the punch list. Once that punch list is issued, that's it. Anything after that, I classify as warranty items. And if you don't do that, that punch list can be an ongoing living document that lasts for 12 months. So you got to have a cutoff. And I typically, it's when after we've done the inspection, and typically I will have the owner walk with me when I'm doing the punch list so I can get their comments as well. But once that's issued, anything after that is warranty. Because otherwise, it drags out this closeout process. It's going to drag out the final payment because you keep adding on more and more work that the contractor's got to do before you can issue that final pay application.
That's exactly right. If you go back to the next slide, Matthew, that's perfect setup, Doug. You know, there's a contractor. Maybe many of you won't know what that image is, a fax machine there beside them, and the superintendent saying, what is it, boss? Another punch list from the architect. You can't do that. And I've got a really good friend who's a CA person, and her favorite line is that the punch list is about getting finished. It's not about getting even. So, you know, who does it make look bad when we generate at project closeout this incredibly long and detailed list? Well, my opinion is it sort of makes it look like we haven't been doing our job if we weren't pointing those things out as we came closer to the conclusion of the project. So you're making those notes, you're making those items known to the contractor, you're getting them addressed so that you don't have to write this voluminous punch list in the end. And as Doug said, not keep adding to it as days go by. Sure, you'll see things you missed. As Doug said, those are a warranty item, and you can keep a list of documented things that the contractor's got to complete. But, you know, we're working down to the phase of where it's substantially complete. The owner can move in. The authority having jurisdiction is okay with that. And we'll talk in detail on the next slide about that. And then final completion is we all go home. We start thinking about the next job, and we don't think about this one anymore except to drive by and stop and get a cheeseburger and a milkshake because it's finished and open for business. So let's go to the next slide and talk about substantial completion, and then we'll stop for a series of questions. And so here's what we mean. The owner can start to use the facility for its intended purpose. We've all signed off, including the authority having jurisdiction. The owner takes over many of the routine items like utilities, security. They're maintaining it, and absolutely you've been sure as the architect, engineer, designer that they have the property insured and they've got the proper liability and property insurance in place. And you know, that in some cases, this may even be phased. So you work on projects that are large, and the owner moves into a portion of the project in order to do their work, in order to provide their furnishings, whatever those items might be. So it can be a phased substantial completion. It's not preferred, but sometimes it has to happen. And so they've got the keys and they're ready to rock and roll. Doug, any items to add to that? And then Matthew, any questions?
Nothing to add. Matthew, questions?
Nothing on this end yet. I don't see any hands raised either.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at the next slide and talk about the final. So what does that mean? That we're finally complete, that all items that were unresolved have been resolved, that final change orders have been processed, the project construction side is complete, the project documentation side is complete. Final inspections have occurred, the final punch list items have been corrected. Anything that was discovered, as Doug described, that's been tracked as a warranty, maybe that was discovered either during or after final inspection, that those things have been corrected if they can be, but that they are still documented if they haven't been. Again, warranty it occurs after and can continue to occur after closeout. All the documents have been received, and at this point, all of the project clocks begin to run. So warranties, workmanship, guarantees, and warranties are engaged and activated, I guess I should say. Doug, any comments about final, or Matthew, any hands or questions?
Nothing to add.
And nothing here.
Okay. So let's take a look then at what are some of the best practices that are outlined in the practice guide. These are the things that I think, in my experience, most firms are not taking advantage of, I guess is the best way to say it. So one of the things is an evaluation after occupancy, looking at products or systems or equipment. Often that's done 3 to 6 months after everyone is moved in. It's a great opportunity to identify anything that may have been missed, whether there was something that was non-conforming that we should have seen, whether some warranty issues have appeared that we didn't know about, items that need some kind of action to be taken on them. It's an opportunity to be sure that that happens, right? You schedule that when you establish the final completion date as a follow-up observation. It's a great opportunity to help the owner in looking at further projects in the future. What could we have done better? What did we miss? What opportunities are here that you may want to carry forward in other projects? It's also an opportunity to talk to the end users. So Doug and I have done a lot of educational facilities in our past, and we've had a lot of faculty and staff take us off to the side and say, boy, if we had this to do over again, here's what we would have done. Those are great opportunities to carry information back to your firm to use in the design of the next project. And having this happen also gives an opportunity to assist in any kind of maintenance planning. In 6 months, you may see some things. I'll share another one about schools. Doug and I have seen prototype schools be used in the same county and in one location that has strong management inside the facility. It looks brand new. And then the other that doesn't have strong management inside the facility, it looks much older than 6 months. And so there are opportunities there for you to share in a professional, respectful way ideas about maintaining the facility. So let's look at the next slide, and you'll see CSI has a form in the practice guide for how you might go about doing this. How do you feel as an individual when you get exclusive and special attention from someone? So think about what this may do between you and your existing client to build a more permanent connection and a more permanent bridge. So I'll stop right there to see if, Doug, you have any post-occupancy, especially now being on the owner's side, ideas or additional comments, and then go to Matthew for any hands raised.
Jim, I would agree with the comment you made about the design professionals not taking advantage of doing a post-occupancy evaluation and giving the owner that extra attention. Since I have been here, it has not happened once in about 2.5 years that I've been here. As you said, I know you and I have done them in the past, and it makes a difference. Giving that extra attention, even if it's as simple as a phone call, follow up, and you're asking questions over the phone, it makes a difference, and it sticks in the minds of your owner. Matthew, anything from the group?
Nope, at the moment, everyone's still pretty quiet.
So let's go to the next slide, and this is the final part of the practice guide for project closeout. But we're going to go to just a brief discussion about the last chapter. So here is another form that CSI provides, which is a feedback form, an evaluation form. So in addition to a post-occupancy review, be brave, be bold enough to send this to your client, to the users in the facility, to the contractors you worked with. I've never done this. Reach out to the authority having jurisdiction. You know, the adage that you need to be careful what you ask for, but be ready to listen with open ears what you may learn from the experience you've had on this project. Don't be afraid to ask that because it certainly will help you inform your service as you move forward to other clients. And so, you know, I don't think this is a form that you send. I think this is a form that you sit down with those listed and discuss. You know, maybe you'll get more real, more raw information if you mail it off, but I think that it would be a great form to generate a discussion. And if we don't have any questions, or if Doug doesn't have anything in addition to that, I just wanted to touch a minute on Chapter 13 before we got off the call.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. Matthew, any questions?
No. Feel free to talk about Chapter 13, and then maybe they'll have some as you wrap up today.
Okay. So the final chapter in the practice guide is defined as developing a construction contract administration guide. And the intention of that chapter is to give some formative, if I can make that a word, formative information about how to file, how to track, and how to perform during the construction administration phase. So when we talk about this in a class setting, this is sort of a tickler file, if you will, on the things that you should be thinking about and on the ways that you should be organizing your information. And it includes many of the forms that are potential forms for you to use during the construction phase. It includes CSI forms. It includes AIA forms. There are EJCDC forms referenced. So the professional organizations that represent us all have allowed us to list their forms here that you may find beneficial from the beginning of design to the completion of the project. So that I don't want you to mistake this file for something that you go to when you're getting ready to close out. This is a chapter that should be the first chapter in the book, is the way that you set up your organization to design and go through construction administration. And out of the book, there is a list of forms that are also fill-in forms so that you can use them to set up pieces and parts of your administrative process. So whether there's a project directory or whether you're issuing a recommendation to award. So there are some forms in case you are sole practitioners or in smaller firms that may help you, again, as a tickler to be sure you cover specific information, but as a downright form that you just use, pull up, fill in, and print on your letterhead. So that is what concludes the practice guide as far as formative information. Matthew, that's all I had that I wanted to cover. Doug, I'll pass it to you and then to Matthew. I'm just going to be quiet.
Just as I said last time, if anyone has not seen the practice guide, I strongly encourage you to get a copy of it and use it as an excellent resource. Do we have any questions, Matthew?
We had one question that came in here from Steve asking about where we could get the forms. So I'm going to post a link to where you can purchase the forms directly on the CSI store. But additionally, as was kind of alluded to there by Jim, the purchase of any of the practice groups, the practice guides from CSI, project delivery, contract administration, specifying, or product representation, does include a version of the forms as part of the purchase of that book. So if at all the content in today and the previous sessions interested you, it may be in your best bet to not only purchase the practice guide to be able to find out more content related to what we've talked about, but you then would also have access to get to the forms at the same time. So I am going to copy that link and add that to the overall entire attendance information. So just 1 second here. And we will send that out to everybody. So that'll be a link there to get just the forms. Keep in mind that with the website, in order to purchase anything, you will have to have an account with the website. It's free and simple. It takes about 2 steps. You just need a name and an email address, essentially, so that we can track purchases to that name. So feel free to do that if you want that link. And I am now finding momentarily here the link to the practice guide and where you can buy that as well if that interests you. So don't mind me while I'm trying to talk and search at the same time. But I guess Jim and Doug, if there's anything else you want to recap here quickly while I find and add the link for the practice guide, and then we can close up for today.
Well, last thing, I assume we've covered all the questions and there were no other items left unaddressed. So if we don't have any, I would just say thank you for grinding through this series with us to get through the practice guide. And we're going to take the month of August off, but September we're going to dive back into the issues that you have sent before as items of interest for us to cover. So we'll start through the list. I'll pass to Doug and just say thank you, and especially to Doug, thank you for being with us, and Matthew for driving us during this past year. But Doug, over to you, man.
Oh, I'm going to actually pop it. Sorry, Doug. I'm going to pop in here. We had a question coming from Drusilla. There may be some confusion here. So Chapter 13 regarding the creating your contract your administration guide is the Chapter 13 of the Contract Administration Practice Guide. So there are a total of 5 practice guides from CSI, 5 different publications. There may be some confusion. If you already own what's referred to as the PDPG, that's kind of the main introductory practice guide for project delivery. Project Chapter 13 is on procurement, I've been told. So just some confusion if you've bought that one, which is kind of the main publication, especially if you've taken or sat for the CDT. Don't go to Chapter 13 thinking you're going to find this. That's Chapter 13 of just the Contract Administration Practice Guide, which is a separate publication. Sorry, over to you, Doug.
No problem. I just, again, reiterating what Jim said, thanks everyone for participating. It always goes much better, and we learn when you guys participate and ask questions. We look forward to coming back in a month or two after we take a month off.
All right, well, that does address all of the questions we had today, and we are right after the hour. Thank you again, and you may now disconnect and go about your day.